Yeah, it was absolutely. That's why I was like, man, he must have like a high-end mic, but no, I don't know. You just have a voice for radio.
Right on.
As long as you don't have a face for radio, you're good.
Certainly don't have the face for radio. Yeah.
Too ugly to be on radio.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to our discussion as we take a look behind the scenes at life as a military helicopter pilot. Now, your mileage and experience may vary, but I've recruited a crack team of combat pilots to discuss their memories and lessons learned, as well as to talk about flight school, being the new guy, and the evolution of an Army pilot. So sit back and, as always, enjoy the flight. Cool. So, welcome back, Barrett, and Luke is joining us. I appreciate
Right on.
you coming on.
Maintenance pilot extraordinaire with us.
Where?
Or at least a maintenance pilot.
There you go. Yeah.
Retired. Do you do any? So, I mean, not to get too deep into it, but do you do any maintenance stuff up there? Is it all like? Is it a completely different track for you? Like, how does that work?
Right now, it's a totally different track. I'm on an R&D contract, so it's very different work, but
Yeah.
it's cool because I still get to at least advise on some concepts of sustainability for the project we're on.
Okay. I guess too, like we've kind of already done our introductions in the past one, so if Luke, you just want to just give us a rundown of. I know you were enlisted. You were an infantry guy, weren't you?
I was, and it was kind of cool to see, as a segue from the last video, hearing you guys talk about how many infantrymen become Kiowa pilots, and I was like, well, that's true. What's funny is for me, it was a total impulse buy. I thought I wanted to fly Apaches, and I was actually holding out for a 64D AQC slot. So I was sitting in the classroom out at Shell Airfield there, and they came in and they said, "Hey, we got one slot for Flight School 21 for 50 ADs. Does anybody want to volunteer to fill it?" And my stick buddy Steve, and we were still doing the in-brief. My stick buddy Steve goes, "Dude, you're always talking about how when you're an infantry guy, brag, the only aircraft you ever saw were 58s doing live fires, or you're riding around Blackhawks or jumping out of them." And I was like, "You're right." He goes, "So why wouldn't you want to go do that?" I was like, "You know what, Steve, you're right." And I grabbed my crap, I stood up, and I left Shell and went over to Building 614. And best impulse buy decision of my life.
That's funny.
For sure. And
yeah, no kidding. I mean, we were talking about. Sorry to interrupt you, Luke, but I was just tying it back to that previous conversation about how personalities are drawn, or you just kind of find a fit, right? Like there's certain jobs, and so much of the aviation business is cultural, and how your personality sort of, fits into that paradigm of what that culture for the lift, cargo, attack, and recon tracks are. And there's definitely something to that. So, you ended up an Apache guy later on in life, so to speak, in your career, as did all three of us. But yeah, certainly, like, I have a hard time, and we go back a ways. We go back to 2009 or so, and you and Brian go back even further. But I have a hard time envisioning anything else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it would be a total duck out of water experience if just flying regular aircraft.
So Luke and I go back all the way to 2004. So when I showed up, you were, I think, there maybe 3 months or so ahead of me, couple months ahead of me.
I got there May of '04, and I think you and Bo got there in the fall.
Yeah, I think it was November is when we signed in. So yeah.
Yeah, and it was like right on the heels. Frank got there in like July, July, August maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Frank was between us. So we all you kind of handed the mantle of the Woj off. I think you were the bull Woj, so to speak, for a while. So
Indeed.
And we'll get into that. But yeah, so to go back to your story though about picking aircraft, the funniest, and you bring up Bo, the funniest experience of flight school for me was that day when in my class we were picking aircraft, and so Gabe, was in my flight school class as well, and the entire time all he did was talk about he wants to fly Blackhawks. Well, here it is, it's go time, and they're going down the list, and they go to and they look at Gabe and they say, "What do you want?" And all of a sudden he just goes, "Kiowas." And so Bo, being Bo, who had no filter, knew right from then that he was not going to get Kiowa because they had run out. I think that was like the last one or something, and he knew he wasn't going to get it, and he had wanted it the entire time. Well, Bo had already finished his instrument check ride. Gabe had not, and Bo just looks at him and is straight faced. He goes, "I hope you fail your check ride."
That is exactly something Bo would say.
Absolutely, it was tremendous. And we were just like, golly.
Savage.
Yeah, and it was savage. So I still give him crap anytime I see him about that. But that was hilarious. But yeah, you see some people like suddenly have to make the hard call right there.
Was it still AQC? Like, when was aircraft selection in your time?
For our class, Flight School 21 was about 50%. And so, which is like Bo kind of fell into this weird category where he was, I think, like he was the last person of that top 50%. And so he was the last on the totem pole to get a Flight School 21 slot, which means you get the bottom of the barrel. And he got Apaches. And he had been an Apache armament guy, I think.
Yep, that's right.
And he hated them. Or he liked the alpha. Is what he told me is he liked the alpha model. He's like, if we're still flying alphas, I would love it. He says, but I don't want the delta because there's so much technology, it's broke all the time, blah blah blah. So he wanted
22 years later, still
right.
True.
Yeah. So but back then you could do trades, right? So I was the class leader and I was buddies with the class leader behind us, and we did this weird 3-way swap, and Bo basically got rolled. I think he got rolled a class back and joined a 58 class or something, and then we showed up at Bragg together. But you can't. I guess you can't do that anymore. Like whatever you get, that's what you get, and you don't throw a fit.
Well, they've turned it into a whole production now, where they get the CG or the chief of staff down there. They do to the O Club. They do this big presentation, and
oh gosh,
it's just become a big production, and very, very interesting how they're doing it. But all the flexibility on who gets what, it still needs the Army based.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, it's how many seats do they need to fill what aircraft?
I can speak to that a little bit because that's what I'm doing right now. So it is a little more sexy. For instance, when I did aircraft selection, I think we were just, the class was gathered and we were handed a clipboard with a piece of paper on it. Said these are the available aircraft for your class.
Yeah.
And Mr. Smith, you are number 1 in the OML. So what do you want?
That's exactly.
And then they just kind of went down and put tick marks next to the aircraft that were available.
Yep.
And that was it. What they're doing now is a little more sexy as far as making it an event. They're beer mugs and they're handing stuff out, and the family members are there, and they kind of show a video, and there's music, and they're making a production out of it. So it kind of makes it more it's more memorable for the kids going through.
Yeah.
But like Luke was saying, it's totally it happens every 2 weeks. One week it may be you got anywhere, usually about 40 to 50 flight students in that class that are awaiting selection. And here's your 24 Blackhawks, 3 Chinooks, 2 C-12s, and 8 Apaches. And then the next week here's your 37 Apaches, no Chinooks, 2 Blackhawks, and people get disappointed, because like we were saying last time, like the aircraft that you select, like that's your life for the next minimum 6 years. So
and I guess more now is what they're talking about. Yeah, it was kind of the same. You just went into a room and there was a dude and he said, "Here's the OML. Bill, you're first. And John, you're second. What do you want?" And for assignments too, which was another weird story for me, but I won't get into it.
So I think maybe, and as a segue here, sort of the flow of flight school, after you apply and get selected, and Luke and I were warrant officer candidates and then ended up in flight school. And did you go through flight school as a warrant or as a lieutenant?
Warrant? Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, I was a captain at Fort Knox and applied for a transition to aviation from armor and was not selected. And they told me, hey, you got a strong packet, you should try it again in the next one. And the next one was in 6 months. Well, I was getting ready to go to the career course, what was called the advanced course back then, and I just had the bug at that point. Like, I'd met these pilots just by chance. I'd met like these Apache guys at Fort Knox and talked to them and stuff. And one of them had suggested, like, well, why don't you just go warrant? And I kind of laughed, like, oh, why would I? That's insane. Why would I do that? And then when I didn't get picked up for the transition, I was like, well, maybe I'll look into that. So when I went to Rucker, I PCS there as a captain, and during the in-processing, basically walked into building whatever 5700 as a captain one day and walked out as a W1, and I just walked down the flight school and said, no, I'm here for flight school, and they were like, who are you? And
yeah, that's definitely
because I wasn't normal. It wasn't normal at all. And a class had just started, and they were like, well, we need you to wait 2 weeks, but we're just going to stick you in the next class that starts, which was kind of weird because there were dudes on hold for a really long time. But I guess by virtue of my previous rank, they just kind of ushered me to the front of the line for whatever reason. And then, of course, the first day they pull everybody in. They're like, okay, who here was an E6 or above? And like 6 people raise their hand. Okay, who was an E7 or above? A couple less people raise their hand. And they're like, who was an E8 or above? And like, I'm got my hand up, and they're like, what were you? I was like, a captain. And they're like, oh, you're the class leader. I was like, damn it.
Yeah.
But
maybe worth explaining like the difference between so what's a warrant officer, what is what we call RLOs, regular line officers. So the Army kind of has technical specialists, which are the warrant officers, and in aviation, what the warrant officers do is specialize in aviation throughout their entire careers. But there's also there's service differences. The Navy and the Air Force either used to or still have, in very limited cases, some warrant officers, but not really.
I think the Navy does, but the Air Force does not.
Yeah. So pilot-wise, only commissioned officers is what they're called in the Navy and the Air Force are pilots, whereas in the Army, a warrant officer, not to get too deep in the weeds, holds a warrant versus a commission, although we are commissioned later on, yada, yada, yada. The warrant officer's sole purpose in life, as far as the Army is concerned, is to remain a technical specialist within the particular warfighting system that they are experts in, whereas a commissioned officer is, colloquially speaking, I guess, more of a generalist, sets policy, performs management functions, and then moves on to other functions within the Army, whereas the warrant officer feasibly could spend an entire career in the cockpit, or that's the idea anyway. So that kind of explains the differences. So if you want to fly, you become a warrant officer. If you want to fly and do some management tasks or write policy or develop doctrine or do many other things throughout the service, you have those opportunities as a commissioned officer. That's only that's only scratching the surface, and it probably is more confusing to people that aren't familiar at all than just leaving it alone.
Well, it's even confusing when you look at the width and breadth of the Army and a warrant officer, because in every other field in the Army, you have warrant officers who, almost, I think it's a requirement that they were a non-commissioned officer.
Generally no less than an E6.
So, right, and so they're kind of the old man of wisdom, or woman of wisdom and knowledge in their particular field. A warrant officer in aviation could be straight off the block, enlisted to be a warrant, went to basic, went to warrant officer candidate school, and now is a pilot. And so you kind of see that dichotomy when you have what we call walking warrants in a line unit. I remember in particular, I had a W1 that worked for me when I was in a aviation support battalion, and she was a supply specialist and very good at her job, but very used to being important as a W1.
The expert.
Right, and and kind of exceeded, her reach kind of exceeded her grasp in a certain occasion, and I had to go there and kind of talk to her and like, look, this is an aviation unit and you're a W1. Nobody cares. Like, I got it. You're very smart at supply, and I love you and I appreciate you. You stock the fridge in every other unit in this brigade. So just keep that in mind when you're interacting with people, because all they see is that one little dot. But yeah, for the commission side, and I, having been both, I loved my warrant time, but I guess I've got one of those wandering hearts, and I did, yes, I love flying, and flying every day sounds really good, especially now, based on where I'm at. But everything gets old to some extent, and if you're one of those people that's like, well, I want to do something different, I want to do something new, as an RLO, you're doing that because every job you do is the first time you've ever done it, and you'll probably never do it again, so you're always doing something different. So that is kind of the difference, and there's a sizable pay difference at certain levels.
There
I
is.
mean, that just
exactly.
There is. Yeah. But I took I think it was $1,000 a month pay cut when I left being a captain to become a W1. It didn't matter, because I was doing something I wanted to do and I loved it, and I didn't care about the money. So I think that's kind of that old adage that, if you love what you do, you never work a day. So
yeah, so that's kind of a great segue. There's two paths into Army aviation: warrant officer flight training and going through ROTC or another commissioning source like OCS out of college, and then going into the aviation branch as a lieutenant and then go into flight training. Yeah. But you can apply specifically for warrant officer flight training to do nothing other than that. You are applying to flight training, and in order to do that, you have to be a warrant officer if that's the path you're taking. So they assess you under those criteria, and then you go to warrant officer candidate school to go to flight school, and so on and so forth.
Right. Yep.
So
high school to flight school.
Yeah, two different paths.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know the assessment rate right now? It's been pretty high, so I figure if people want to know about it, then they should know it's a good time to apply, and you can apply from other services right off the street.
Yep. So there are certainly more what we call street to seat warrant officer candidates than I have ever seen throughout my 26 plus years. Street to seat was kind of an anomaly back in the day, because the Army prefers to use, recruit from within the ranks, so to speak. So if you were an E3 and E4 or the infantryman like Luke was, and you look up and you say, I'm tired of sitting in mud holes and carrying a 50-pound ruck and walking 24 miles a day, I want to go fly helicopters. You put your warrant officer flight training packet in to be accepted competitively, and then you go to warrant officer flight training. Well, that was, I don't know what the ratio was, probably 9-1. Now it's probably 6-4. There's a lot more street to seat people. So like you said, it's a pretty good time to get into military aviation in any regard, I think, in any of the services, because there's a lot of outflows, so to speak, for many reasons.
And just to highlight that, even the reserve component right now has a huge recruiting campaign going on. There are opportunities for recently retired from active duty aviators to go back to flying on active duty.
Yeah.
Or, fill our staff position even. So
yeah, that
ties to a couple other conversations about our current force, health of our force, I guess is the way to say that. But
well,
not for here.
When I get bored, I tell or get frustrated at work, I just tell my wife I'm going to drop my warrant packet again. But she says we can't afford that change again, so
yeah,
I'm stuck.
It's all about the standard of living.
Oh yeah, especially when you have a multitude of kids. Yeah, so kind of, not that we're off track, but let's just talk about flight school. So I know it's changed a little bit, and Luke, you can definitely talk to this. I think when I saw you, a little over a year ago now, and we kind of talked about the changes as far as the IPs, but when I think we all went through flight school, it was primary, and then you went to instruments, but now that's kind of integrated.
Yeah, so they've worked in the last year to separate it back out, but basically what happened is you kind of had the classic where you went through ground school first 2 weeks, and then you started flight training primary. And then after primary, you did instruments. And then after instruments, then there was a split because you either went to low-level nav, like a 2-week prep course prior to starting Flight School 21 in advanced aircraft, or you did the full basic warfighter skills where you did tactical nav, all the tactical stuff, and MVG qualification, and then you went to an aircraft qualification course after that.
So flight school, in the beginning, you're just learning how to fly a helicopter, obviously, which, I remember the most shocking part of primary for me was, I think it was like day 2. And the IP says, well, tomorrow when you guys come in, we're going to do autos. And like, we hadn't hovered yet or anything, and I was almost in tears. I was scared. I was like, are you serious? Like, I don't even know how to land yet. And he's like, oh, no, it's easier than landing. And he was right. And then hovering, you're learning all these things that I don't care how good you are playing video games. Like, there's some hard stuff. Hovering, I need to find video to put up with this. Some of the crazy video that I saw of dudes, like aircraft just like it was a rodeo, like the nose goes like 60 degrees up and the tail's practically hitting the ground and they're spinning all around. But hovering an aircraft and learning how to do that the first time is absolutely majestic to watch.
I always told guys the hardest things to learn in a helicopter are the first 5 hours when you're trying to figure out like how to work your left arm, your right arm, and your 2 feet and make it hover. And then after a couple of years, when you have a combat deployment underneath you, coming back to Fort Rucker, and you're expected to fly a precision traffic pattern. And let me tell you, combat pilots suck at flying precision traffic patterns.
Oh, absolutely. But hovering in particular, I think, is an absolute. Hovering and soloing are the two pivotal moments in flight school, particularly in the beginning, because when you finally start to hover, it's a brand new world.
For sure. And people would be surprised, I think, at the finesse and lack of motion in the flight controls. So everybody over controls when they're learning. And I think people that aren't pilots yet would be surprised to know that you are barely moving the controls to make these things happen.
Yeah.
It's very subtle. And so there's a lot of tendency. You have to overcome a tendency, number one, to be really tense and over grip. And like when you're first learning, you're flying for an hour at a time. Your syllabus time or your daily flight training is maybe an hour to an hour and 10 minutes. And by the end of that hour, you are no kidding. Like, your neck hurts, your wrist hurts because you've been death gripping the cyclic. You've been pressing on both pedals and using dozens of pounds of pressure and tensing every muscle in your body, when all that's really required is grams of pressure.
Yeah.
And that realization comes at usually around 6 hours or so, when somehow your mind just goes, okay, this is how it works. Now, by no means are you any good at it.
Yeah.
But you're no longer a hazard to anyone within a square mile.
At least 1 square mile.
Right.
Well, Luke, do you remember when you found the hover button? Like, do you have a moment in time where it's like, oh my God, I'm hovering, and you remember it?
It's funny. I remember feeling like I was definitely behind everybody else. I don't know if that was true. I feel like that's just the natural anxiety everybody gets. They're like, oh, everybody's going to get it before me. Yeah. What's weird is, heading control came real quick. Doing some pretty sweet pendulums out at the stage field, but my nose stayed pointed at the right spot. And so, my IP's like, okay, tell you what, I'll do this part, you take the cyclic and the pedals, and I'll just work the collector for you, And so I'm just, start making cookies with the cyclic. I'm like, okay. And I almost got this. And what's funny is almost everybody comes to a point where they cancel out all their own moves, right? And so in the TH-67 or even Alpha Charlie, it's like this magical little 30-degree offset figure 8 pattern that if you can get the right rhythm going, you can move it within all that control range, 2-3 inch displacement, but in this little figure 8 pattern, the aircraft starts hovering because you're just washing out. Yeah, and you're just washing all out. But it's when that gets out of balance, stuff goes sideways.
Well, I remember picking up the 58 for the first time, and they all told us, hey, you don't have to stir the soup because you've got SCAS. And I remember picking it up, and just it's muscle memory. You're gonna do it, and the IP just throwing his hands up in the air to make sure that everyone watching knows that he is not the dude flying. And that is a classic maneuver that I would still do flying 64s. I would throw my hands up when the other guy was doing something like, nope, ain't me.
Oh, absolutely. It's just the ultimate pilot disclaimer. It's that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I remember the hover button for me. We were sitting in the sod between two of the runways on the stage field. I think it was, what is that, High Peak or High Point or whatever. High Bluff. Yeah. I think it was High Bluff. But sitting in the sod, and we were waiting for this guy to finish an auto, and my IP is like leaning forward and looking up, and he's like, "Oh, look at this guy!" Like he was like mocking him, like something was wrong or whatever. And he's like, "Look at this dude," and I kind of lean forward and look. And I'm not thinking about hovering, and the aircraft was just perfectly stable.
And you detached your brain from the process.
And because I just let my inner ear and my body control it, and not thinking about it. And then he looks and he goes, "Look, you're doing it." And the moment he said that, all of a sudden we're riding the Bronco again.
It was like Bambi on ice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and all those guys they have umpteen thousands of hours. So back then you probably still had some Vietnam holdovers.
Absolutely.
If they're not some still around, they've been
still
flying
some there.
Yeah, they've been flying forever. I remember, like you were saying, Brian, like your first few forays at the stage field, and you're actually, transitioning from learning how to hover to doing traffic patterns and then autos and etc. But there was a point, like prior to my stage 1 check ride, the IP said, "All right, go out and we're going to start with an auto from altitude, and then we'll do a low level auto, then a low level low airspeed, blah blah blah." And so we climbed up into the pattern, got to 1,000 feet, 90 knots, and I entered, was in auto rotation, and I looked over to my left. And so this guy, his name was Tiny. I don't remember who he was, but he was a ginormous guy, of course, with that nickname.
Yeah.
Huge belly. He's probably 65, 67. I don't know how old he was.
Yeah.
But I looked over, and his chin was on his chest, like asleep. And they've been doing it so long.
Nothing scares them.
It's complete mundane task to them. And then I reached about 400 feet. I was thinking about transitioning to, start my decel, etc. And he perked right up, and then he was completely engaged. But on the way down and throughout the traffic pattern, he was, to my estimation, completely like checked out and asleep.
Yeah. I mean, these are dudes who've seen it all. I'll never forget my primary instructor. I love him to death, Bob Gilbert. It's crazy that I can remember that dude's name, and I've met so many people since then. I just can't. But and they were just so cool, and you could not. They were completely unflappable. I remember the first time he did the simulated engine failure while we were in the pattern, and I guess the way he said it put me at ease. Like, I thought he was just talking about it. I didn't realize that what he was telling me was that he was simulating an engine failure. And so he rolls off the throttle, and I did nothing, and I continued to do nothing, and I didn't understand what was happening. And he's like, you gonna do something? And later he told me, he's like, I could practically count the rotor blades passing, by, because the rotor was getting so low. But you could not shake these dudes. I mean, because they've seen it all. I mean, they've, as bad as Luke thinks he was, there's a dude 20 times worse, and that guy's flown with that guy, 50 times. So you can't shake him.
Nope.
And then Luke, crazy. And then you fast forward 20 years, and then Luke's one of those guys, and I can only imagine some of the things you've seen.
Yeah, it was entertaining for sure. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I bet. All right, so one of the things I guess has kind of gone away, and you guys would know this better than me, is we had some sort of traditions and rites of passage. I guess there's a new one now, the rites of passage, as far as the aircraft selection. We talked about that, but in our day we had the hats. We had the colored hats that everyone wore. I guess that's not a
Right.
thing. I guess that went away a while ago.
We're actually looking to bring that back. So
Oh, nice.
there's a lot of research. Yeah, that's one of the goals that Cause has. So we're looking into it, and we want to bring it back. It's just a matter of finding the funding. How do we do it, et cetera.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I would expect it to happen.
And you got to do it right. I mean, there were people that would exploit, like anything that's, quote unquote cool. It can be exploited. But you had your hats, and then you got your solo wings when you soloed, and I think you soloed around 17-ish hours. I think is when I soloed. Maybe
Sounds
sooner.
about right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And even that, I mean, it's not a true solo. At least it wasn't back then, because you had your stick buddy with you. I mean, neither of you knew what you were doing, so I guess it's still a solo, but you didn't have an IP on board.
That's right.
Yeah. But you got your solo wings, and you'd sew them onto your hat, and then this was another thing, the solo cycle.
Yeah. So that was around when I went through in 97, and I guess it was still around in 04, 05 when you guys went through.
So it actually
would have been 06, 07.
No, so my class was the first class where they didn't have the solo cycle. It went away with, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, the hats, now that I think about it, the hats went away when I was there.
Wow.
Is that right? There was something, because I basically told the guys to throw their solo wings on because we were about to stop wearing the hats, and I was like, just put your solo wings on, because at least you'll get to wear them for a couple days. Something I can't remember. It's been so long. But yeah, but the solo cycle was this contraption would ride. Was it like the junior guy in the class would ride it, and everyone would squirt him with water guns or something?
Oh, the last guy to solo.
Last guy.
That's what it was. Yep. Last guy to solo. And it was this weird little bicycle with a rotor on it and stuff, and that would be cool if that could come back. But
yeah, and there was sort of a gauntlet you had to run, at least when I went through. So, your whole class was out there, and so
it was like the whole company. I mean, it was like anybody who was available.
Everybody's out there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And everybody had a beverage of some sort, or flour, or whatever, something to throw at the unlucky person that was the last one to be put up for their solo ride. And then you had to run that gauntlet on the bike and get doused in beer and whatever else, and flour, and you made it through, and it was a good time, and there's probably a party afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, those traditions are, they kind of come and go, but definitely times have changed, and those sorts of things are fewer and far between.
And that's one of the things like that drew me to aviation. I remember, being around Air Force units growing up and seeing kind of the way that they would do things. Luke, I don't think you went down to Shaw. No, because this is when I was in Alpha. But when we flew down to Shaw Air Force Base and lined up some training, it was after the 09-10 deployment.
Yeah, I did not get to do that because you guys went down and tried out the EW range.
No, it wasn't the EW. We were doing something with JTACs.
Oh, I thought you did the EW range.
No, we went down there and did some. Well, funny story. So we were flying around the box, and we saw these, or the box. I'm talking local here. We're flying around at Bragg, and we see these dudes riding around on 4-wheelers. And one of my guys, he's like, "Hey, I'm just gonna land and just talk to these dudes and see if they're doing something, and maybe we can do something, because we're bored." And so he lands and starts talking to them, and it turns out they were like soft JTACs, and they wanted to do some stuff with us down at Shaw, and that's how that started.
That's right. Okay.
And they introduced us to the F-16 squadron, and we ended up flying down there and giving them like a capabilities class, and they gave us one and something. But as we show up, they're like, "Oh, you guys are a little early. You can hang out in our little ready room," or whatever they called it. It is a full ass bar with, just a place you would go on your own time. And the back wall was pure glass, and it faced out onto the flight line, and all these F-16s are parked out there, and you see them taxiing out, And I just looked at the guys. I says, "I don't care what we have to do. We are building something like this at the hangar." I was like, "I will give up my office. I don't care. Like, we have to do something." And so I think, when you talk about aviation culture and things, some of the other branches, they do some pretty cool stuff. And, I think the optics change, and different branches look at things differently. But, solo cycle is one of those I kind of wish we'd bring back.
Yeah, certainly the Air Force revolves around its pilots, right? They're
Yeah.
I mean, so they're the ones that are put up on the pedestal, so they can kind of
they can get away with stuff.
They want. Yeah, they can get away with stuff, and it's kind of the same with Navy aviation. I have to say that the cavalry in the Army has maintained its traditions probably more so than a lot of the other branches. So that's something that we cling to as something very near and dear to our hearts. Out of flight school, and then and it brings us together. So organizationally we're the smallest organizations, except maybe the attack battalions are kind of the same. But the family group in a cavalry squadron and troop is pretty tight.
Yeah, I think
because there's only 28 of you.
Well, even Luke, I mean, we were both in an attack battalion that then reflagged to a cav squadron. And I don't know, from your standpoint, I felt like it was already a pretty tight unit, but I still feel like there was more tradition and stuff that came with being a cav squadron that sort of solidified that.
Yeah, I agree. And we had a solid foundation already started there. And, we basically just changed names, and we plus sized by, guys that had been in Germany or other, Kiowa units or cav units came out, there's all of a sudden the Stetsons came out, the Spurs came out, and, really the education and the handover of those traditions started. And, it wasn't planned. It was just how it worked.
Well, and it's funny too, like some of the guys who sort of resisted the change, and then went whole hog and bought into it. I remember K-Bomb, and I'll have to send him the link so he knows we're talking about him. But I remember him in particular. He said something one day. He was like, "Well, I've been an attack battalion guy my whole time, and I don't want to do this." And he was making fun of the funny hats. And I mean, he's huge cav. Like he had, he bought in whole hog, which was good, but. But yeah, and that's a topic that I do want to save. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole because I think we can really spend some time on talking about that. But kind of going back to flight school, so it is an interesting time. It is hard work. It is long hours. I remember going to bed at 10, 11 o'clock at night, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, making it to flight line, flying all morning, doing classes in the afternoon. I mean, as you got through the course, it got a little bit better, got a little bit easier. But primary was an absolute just ball buster. And I think by the time, especially in the 58-64 track, there was only so much classroom work that could be done. So you got to a point where you didn't have class anymore, you just had flying. And that was true when I went back for the 64 course as well. But
weather days affect that as well. So
sure,
You have academics in conjunction with flight line when your course starts regardless. So you have a split schedule, AM and PM, either flight line to academics, or you have AM academics and PM flight line. Mm-hmm. But if you have weather days and you have to scrub, a few days, then your academics continues on because you go to class every day regardless, but you may or may not get to fly when you show up to the flight line. So eventually you run out of the programmed academics, and then all you have left is flight line trying to finish up your flying, your mandated flying hours or programmed flying hours for the course. And you could be 2 weeks over schedule, which means you finished academics a month ago. So which is kind of nice because then you only have a half day of showing up to.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, when you're in the 64 course, because it's so long, and the 58 one I think was almost just as long. I think it was like a 2 week
shorter.
Yeah, it was like a week or two. There's only so much academics you can really do, and so by the time you're done there, you've probably been out of class for a couple of weeks at least. I don't know how it is for the 60s and 47s because that's a much shorter course. I want to say the 60 course is only like 6 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's 6 weeks and a few days.
Yeah, where the Apache and Kiowa was like 17, 18 weeks.
13 weeks.
Oh, was it 13? Okay.
Yeah.
It was harder when I went, so. So then, you finish up flight school, and of course now, I guess they do SEER on the beginning of it, which I think is a good choice. You had SEER, you had some other courses, so I mean, you're there for a really long time. I mean, that is a long experience. I think I was there a year and 2 weeks, but we weren't doing SEER when I went through, and probably the same for you guys. Or you're doing like SEER B, like start a fire.
I did SEER B, eat a rabbit, smoke a chicken.
Yeah.
We actually ate a couple snakes. That was fun.
Ugh. Don't talk to me about snakes. There was a snake crawling my neighbor's front door today.
I saw your post.
Well,
man.
no, there was another
dying.
one. There was
Oh, you
another
gotta
one.
be kidding me.
Today.
There must be a nest. There's probably a nest in his door jamb.
Yeah, or it's like the other snake's girlfriend looking for him or something. I don't know, but it was climbing the wall, and I was sitting there drinking my coffee, and I was like, this is too much.
Like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, I gotta go. Like I told my wife, like, if that happened to my house, we just have to burn down the house. Like, we've just lost all our stuff. That's unfortunate, you know. So anyway, finish up flight school. Let's just kind of talk about what happens next. Particularly for warrant officers, because this is a shared experience of being the new guy, which is the WOJ. So who wants to talk about the WOJ?
Well, so the WOJ, that stands for Warrant Officer Junior Grade, otherwise officially W01, Warrant Officer First Class. You go to your first duty assignment and show up as the new guy, and your learning really starts. So you finish flight school. It's not like you show up at a unit ready to be a mission pilot. You have a whole nother probably 3-4 months of training to go through to work through a progression period where they take you from flight school knowledge to this is how we do business here at this installation and in this unit, and progress you through readiness levels from flight school proficiency to and then you learn your what we call mission tasks, but how to fight the aircraft. And then eventually you end up probably 6 months later signed off and no longer having to fly with instructor pilots, but you start flying with just the other guys in the unit. And right. Then your true learning begins.
Well, because in flight school, you really don't do any team, you don't do any formation. You do a little bit, a very tiny bit of formation flying. It's almost like introductory, yeah. Right? It's like, and it just happens to be like, oh, that guy's going the same way we are. We'll call him and link up. And so you're not really doing tactics at a team level. When I went through, and Luke, maybe they were doing this when you were there too, at the end of the 58 course, did you do a big like mission with your class?
No, but you know what's funny is we did our end of course AAR, and that was one of our things was like, we go out, we shoot rockets, shoot 50 cal out at the range.
Yeah.
Why isn't there like a deliberate attack kind of culminating mission at the end of this? What would it take to do that? And I guess out of that, it had been mentioned a couple other times, but that's when they started doing the end of class mission was to fly down to Eglin and do a live Hellfire shoot.
So what they did in my class was we didn't shoot anything. We actually went north. I don't remember where we went, but we did this big 6-ship mission. It was really 3 teams of 2. And I think they made me the AMC for one, and then they did another iteration. But you went out there and you had to kind of manage. So all the students sat left seat, the IPs flew right seat, and it was just putting you through the motions of controlling the site and talking on a radio and coordinating, and you had to, quote unquote, call for fire and stuff. And then the Hellfire shoot. The only time I saw any Hellfire shooting, and funny enough, my wife actually got to fly in a Kiowa during the Hellfire shoot. And they flew a bunch of Apaches and Kiowas down, and she worked for the newspaper on post. And they sent her down to do a story on it, and she flew with one of my IPs in a 58, and they flew on the wing of a 64 so she could take pictures and stuff,
nice.
Which was really cool. And and apparently something went wrong with the Hellfire because like it went off the rail and just hit the ground right in front of them. And she, she doesn't know the difference, and she like explained it, and I'm like, I don't think that was supposed to happen. Like, that's not right.
Yeah.
You guys are going down this rabbit hole of like, oh, the future, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to talk about Woj stocking the fridge.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
6 months in the unit.
Well, it's not. There's some important things there, and I may or may not have been corrected on my course of how I interacted with Wojs such as you, Brian, or Bo, or right. But anyway. When I had to learn, my experience was I needed to learn my place because, you kind of come out of flight school a little bit high on yourself because you just did something pretty cool, right?
Yep.
But one thing on that same line of thinking as far as showing up and being a Woj, it's one of those things where you hate it while it's going on.
Yeah.
Regardless of how much somebody decides to make your life hell or not, it's just a sucky period, right? But it's so necessary. You're really kind of reforging yourself, and what I love about the warrant officer community is everybody comes from such a diverse background.
Yeah.
That everybody has something to offer. One or two pilots that were not good pilots at all happen to be really talented carpenters. And just built crap for us downrange. You know what I mean? Like there's examples of that all over where they still contribute to the team, even though they kind of need to be brought alongside everybody. And I feel like we started to lose a couple things. One, we didn't have time between deployments and op tempo to really focus on that all the time.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things you just kind of hand down from you were the Woj, now the next guy's the Woj, you're in charge of the Woj. And it just it's a cycle. And it just keeps trickling down.
Yeah.
And it's effective to an extent, but there's some negatives to it also. Then you got some people that just make it their life to treat you like a Woj for the first 2 years you're in it.
Yeah,
I don't have time for those people.
Yeah, that's maturity and, an inferiority complex and a lot of different things. So
lots of different things, absolutely.
That crushing the new guy thing, there's a leadership aspect there too. And like you said, there's a developmental process through that. But, you saw it in flight school with certain IPs that couldn't understand that they're mentors and teachers, not just power holders. They wore their IP-ness on their shoulders, so to speak,
right,
and took no they didn't hesitate to make you feel stupid if given the opportunity, which is not the point at all.
IP-ness is now a doctrinal term, by the way.
Right. I get credit for it.
Well, so for the Woj, just for someone who doesn't know, so the Woj, we're talking about responsibilities. It's kind of akin to, you see it in movies and stuff. The new guy on the cop squad or the fire department, the probie. You'll hear that term a lot in kind of TV shows and stuff. It's the same concept. So you're the guy who
you have rookie status.
Yeah, you're a rookie. Regardless of where you came from, which I caught all kinds of hell.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Based solely on my background, having nothing to do with me, Luke. No, I mean it wasn't your fault, but you do know who I'm talking about when I say some of these things because you went through it too. But yeah, there was a tearing down, but it's also a chance for you to show that you're a team player. And we've all had the experience of the guy that wasn't that dude, who didn't step up to the plate. But it is somewhat demeaning, but on purpose to. And demeaning is probably a strong word. It's demeaning if you think it's demeaning. Like if you really think so much of yourself that you can't bring yourself to make coffee for everybody, or you can't sweep up at the end of the day.
If you're seeking opportunity to be the victim, it's the perfect situation for you. But if you're looking for, if you can demonstrate your character with a little bit of sacrifice and what you're willing to contribute to the team, that respect and value is going to be returned back to you tenfold.
Yeah, and then it's just a matter of having fun with it. I loved being a Woj. Like once I got used to it, I absolutely I loved being the fridge guy, mainly because I could just leave work and you guys didn't know because I would be like, oh, I'm going shopping, and and I wasn't shopping, but
you should have been studying your -10. That's what you're supposed to be doing.
Well, yeah, but I wasn't. So you didn't know that. But then you see some funny things too that come out of it. Like I'll never forget taking the trash out one day to the dumpster, and I heard this weird sound off in the distance from the Black Hawk Battalion next door, and I look over, and there's a dude in like a brown coat or like a cloak with a hood on it, and a lightsaber toy, and there's like 50 people circling this dude like in a crescent shape, and they're shooting a paintball gun at him, and he's trying to block these paintballs with the lightsaber. And I was like, that's their Woj, I guarantee it. He's just made RL1 or something. But and he'd have those funny things.
It's a rite of passage, and it's all about how you take it, like you were saying.
And if you take it poorly, it lasts longer.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is absolutely proportional to your response.
That's right. If you show weakness, it will only make it worse.
Blood in the water.
Yep.
Yeah, it really is.
When I showed up, so my first duty assignment was to Fort Drum, and that was the 317 Cav in those days. And I showed up, and 2 weeks later, one of the guys had managed to acquire what we were talking about last session, Brian, was one of those 20 millimeter Cobra barrels.
Mm-hmm.
So those things weigh about 60 pounds. I don't know how tall they are. They're like 4.5 feet, 5 feet tall.
Yeah.
But I was given those and said, you will bring these to, if we see you without the barrels, you're going to suffer.
Yeah.
So every, Friday night beer call, every hail and farewell or whatever, I had to bring those barrels, 60 pounds of unwieldy metal that wouldn't fit in my trunk. So it was like, I got to put them in the back seat and then drag them with me in Fort Drum in the winter in the snow, And of course, if you lose accountability of the barrels, then it gets worse for you. So if I'm, at a hail and farewell and I set the barrels down by my table to go refill, get another beer, well, when I come back, the barrels aren't there. Well,
No.
then it goes poorly for the Woj that lost the barrels. So that's the kind of games that are played.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all just how you manage it and get through it. And if you sort of, I guess, just demonstrate the mental resiliency to deal with it and take it on the chin, it's over in 2 weeks, and then training starts.
Yeah, and what's funny is that building that mental resiliency or proving it at least exists, or the capacity to build it, really paid off downrange how many times.
Yeah.
You don't think about it during those times, but it really does have a lasting impact.
Well, Luke, there was a guy, and I don't want to mention his name, that didn't conform very well with the Wojness. Yeah, well, sure. I mean, we all do, but to Luke's point, and then we deployed, and that sort of like, well, you never graduated from being a Woj.
That's right.
And it carried on even through the deployment, where this person kind of felt like they were part of the team. And, of course they were, but it was still like, we still expect Woj things from you. And they were like, well, I don't understand. We're deployed. I was like, yeah, but you never stepped up to the plate as far as being a Woj. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun time. I mean, and if you, again, as I look back at it, some of my most fun was when I was a Woj, because that goes back to that tradition of aviation, of just kind of having fun and screwing around. And it was never really meant, again, you're going to have those certain characters here and there, but generally speaking, no one's doing it to be mean to you. It's really all in fun and jest, because they've all been there too, and it's a shared experience. It's not SEAL Team Hell Week or anything like that, but
no.
You got to come in a little bit early and do some cleaning, or stay a little late, or this, that, and the other. I think there's some fun opportunity. I mean, I don't know how many times I sandbagged for K-Bomb doing a maintenance flight, because I was just the Woj sitting around and I had nothing to do, and it's like, hey, it's flight time for me.
So that's a nice segue. While all of this unit cohesiveness building is going on, you are also, when you show up to your first unit, you get integrated into the training program, and then they sort of build the schedule for your training. And like I was saying, you start with the basic tasks where you left off flight school with, and then over the course of probably several months, as you demonstrate proficiency, getting better at learning your job, you progress to mission tasks, and then team training, and then gunnery, and you end up as a mission pilot. So while you're going through the indoctrination into the aviation culture, you're also flight training and learning how to do your business as a new pilot. So that's going on concurrently, and that probably takes just as a number 6 months before you're signed off to be a mission pilot. And at that point, you're a PI. So the progression is PI, which is pilot, and then after a couple of years, you make pilot in command, and then you start thinking about what you want to do with your career, whether you want to go instructing or maintenance or safety or tactics. And you eventually, as a warrant officer, you end up in one of those track courses, and then you go to another unit, and by that time you're a senior W2 or W3, and you specialize in one of those tracks.
So that's kind of
the tracks. That's 3 years in a nutshell.
Yeah, so the tracks, and that's probably a good. I mean, we've got 3 tracks here because I was a TAC Ops guy. Obviously, you're an IP, Barrett, and then Luke, you're a maintenance guy, and we're all safety officers. I mean, that's
that's what my safety dot says on my. Oh wait, I'm retired.
So I've always said, we're all safety officers. Just some of us are tracked that way, but yeah. So IPs, it's kind of obvious what they do. Instructor pilots, kind of keeper of the standard. Maintenance pilots.
You're the best.
Right. The first among equals, as I used to say, as a TAC Ops guy. All the power, none of the responsibility. Maintenance guys are, which sounds absolutely terrifying. I remember telling my mom, when I was at the unit very early on, and I said, "Oh yeah, I flew with the maintenance test pilot," and she was terrified. Like, what are you talking about? Because I think to the layperson, you hear that term and you hear test pilot. You don't hear anything else. So
yeah, we fly it and see if it works.
Yeah, you're assuming that every flight is an adventure with a test pilot.
It's a crew chief validation exercise.
Yeah, it's. I remember. I think the first one was like, "Oh, we got to make sure this compass swings properly." I was like, "Oh, okay." But maintenance.
But then when you're doing an auto after a main rotor head replacement, it's a different ball game.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've had to do things in Iraq in Apaches that we're flying from one base to another. It's an hour plus flight, and we're like, oh, we're gonna do this thing while we're doing it. Like, oh my god, okay. But yeah, the maintenance test pilots, are obviously working hand in hand with the crew chiefs and the avionics guys and stuff. But you're the guy who's making sure that once it's all put back together, you're the one taking it out there and testing it out.
The certification authority, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the return to service or airworthiness authority for the commander, and that's definitely. I loved it. I'm big into maintenance. Love the maintenance world.
Yeah.
Love the maintenance team. Hate to see people doing it wrong or with no heart. That just drives me crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's a thankless job.
It is.
Yeah, I was just about to say that it's probably the most work intensive.
Oh yeah.
And if the maintenance guy isn't doing it right, then you don't fight. So
yeah, the unit feels it.
Critical.
Yeah. And then the real true best track, which is the TAC Ops. I know that's world renowned.
I don't think it identifies as TAC Ops anymore.
No, it got some weird name, and I've heard they're going to bring it back, which they need to.
Yeah, it changed its binary gender.
Yeah, it doesn't identify as TAC Ops. It's now what is it? Aviation Mission Survival something.
It's like AMSO, which
sounds way too much like safety to me. And
safety officer, yeah, because
So I refuse to use the term. I'm a TAC Ops guy by trade, but. And TAC Ops is the black sheep, if no one can tell, the black sheep of the tracks. Some would say it's not even really a track, but then I'd always point to safety and say, well, if they are, then we certainly are. But the TAC Ops guy is really the EW guy, the mission planning, survivability. So he's the nerd who knows, well, the SA6 can track blah blah blah. It's not for everyone. It's technical, not like maintenance technical, but geek computer type stuff. In fact, I think that's how Bo and I really became the TAC Ops guys. We didn't have any in the troop,
but you guys knew computers.
We knew amps, right? I mean, and of course, Bo, he's a computer, human computer, but we both knew amps pretty well.
Robot.
Yeah, and so we actually tracked before we even made PC, just because they needed to fill the slots, but.
Well, you can do that then.
Yeah, you can't even do that now.
Yeah, you can't do that anymore. You could do that then.
Yeah, it was waiverable. You had to have a waiver. But we did that just in preparation for the deployment. I enjoyed TAC Ops. I think I learned a lot. I had a good time with it. I think it goes hand in hand with being an IP, and I know they had talked about kind of merging them. Not really merging, but I think their goal was to be a TAC Ops guy, then also get IPC, the instructor pilot course, and then kind of be like an RL 2 to 1 trainer.
Right.
Whereas, regular IPs were kind of working the RL 3 type stuff. Obviously that's parochialism gets in the way of that, I think, in some cases as well. But no, I love TAC Ops. I think it was great. It was fun, good fun.
It's kind of the progression we started this whole half hour talking about what to expect when you first get to the unit, and
yeah,
I think that ties a bow in it pretty well. So your first assignment is where you're working towards making pilot in command. That's really the goal and the expectation.
yep,
And every unit treats it a little bit differently, and so the cultures treat it a little bit differently too. Between lift, cargo, attack, and recon. Throughout my years, I've noticed some differences in how the seniors within a community / culture treat their juniors and how they develop their aviators. They approach it differently and think about it differently. Speaking to our experience, I think our collective experience, and then it varies from person to person on who happens to be in charge, at the time. But the approach from our 58 community perspective in general is to, number one, you're expected to know your job and to make pilot in command, which is in contrast to some other airframes where I have sort of noticed over the years that it's almost dangled as a carrot, like you have to prove to us that you're worthy of being a PC.
right. Yeah, I think some communities see making pilot command differently than others. Though I think that has changed some. I know the Apache community, it appeared from the outside, and now that I've gotten in it, I've heard that confirmed, that making PC as an Apache guy was the sort of rite of passage, and it was difficult. It was very seat dependent, like, well, you're a front seat guy or you're a day PC only, whereas our community, I think, was very unique, that we didn't do that. I mean, it was either you're a PC or you're not. And it's both seats, it's night, it's day. Like, I don't think I've ever seen anybody who was a day only PC.
Exactly. And that's kind of where I was going.
Yeah.
It's like my philosophy and perspective was, when you're signed off RO1, you're competent.
Right.
Like, you're going to be flying with, Peter PC, looking at crew mix and all the other aspects of how we approached putting a crew together. But yeah,
now the caveat, I guess you could say, to that is, in the 58 world, of course, the other side of that is I can reach all of your controls, so
smack your hand and
that's right. Worst case scenario, I can do your job for you to enough to get us home. Obviously in a 64, I mean, if something happens, you can't talk to the other guy, or it's very difficult. So I can understand it a little bit, in that community, but it has changed quite a bit.
And to be fair, a far more complex aircraft than 58. Just the systems in it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think making pilot command is, like I described to people, because as an RLO, making PC is a big deal, because you go from being a commodity, you become a commodity that people want, versus you're a burden. Exactly, you're a burden, and you go to being a commodity. I remember when coming back to the squadron after the crew course, and now I'm an RLO and I'm working up at staff, and I could barely get anyone to fly me, and I got JD to get me going, and I said, I'm going to be a quick up, man, just get me flying. And he got me signed off quick, and then I made PC pretty quick after that, and suddenly the phone was ringing. Suddenly people needed me on the flight schedule, but I was begging and borrowing to get on the flight schedule before that. So once you make PC, you meet your value added to the unit, I guess you could say.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because you can do it all, basically. So
yeah, you can fill any kind of role at the basic mission level. Yeah, totally. The last thing that I think that people who aren't in the aviation community should understand, and it goes back to the Woj stuff, is ball busting. There's a lot of it that goes on, and it doesn't just have to be Woj's. I mean, even you today were busting me on YouTube for the video, and like, oh, you didn't do you didn't do this and that, and that's very typical and very standard. In fact, a commercial came on the TV today, and it was like a YouTube commercial, and it showed this person flying a Cessna, and it was like, learn to fly. And I just said, "Oh, I'm a better pilot than you." And my wife looked at me like, "Why would you say that?" I said, "Because I'm a pilot, and every pilot is better than every other pilot. Like, that's just the way it is, and we're all better than everyone else." But we bust each other out, constantly, and most of it's good-natured and for fun, and every now and then it's not. But that's part of the life, and I think that goes back to that. Why do we do Woj type stuff? Because let's be honest, like RLOs, lieutenants, they go through their own rite of passage for being a Woj. They're not really a Woj, but I mean, Luke, you remember Stewie? I mean, you remember his desk?
Yep.
The little tiny like side table that we gave him with a monitor and no computer.
Lieutenant Watts too. Remember the little play school desk that somebody brought in for Lieutenant Watts?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, they go through this too. Obviously, it's a little bit different just because rank.
Yeah, you got to maintain the relationships there for sure,
but their reaction will also color the rest of their days. But yeah, I mean, if you go in, and I'm sure I know it's the same in every other branch. You got to be ready to take a little, but you got to be able to give a little too. And that's just part of the culture and part of the lifestyle, and I love it. I mean, I think that's the fun part, because at the end of the day, it is always really meant to be good natured.
It becomes the stuff you remember the longest.
Oh, absolutely. We could fill hours telling stories
absolutely.
about this happened this one time to this guy because he did X. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for taking the time. I looking at the comments and the response from the last video, I've had guys just text me and be like, "Oh, hey, I watched your video." Like I didn't even know they knew about it. It's hard. I don't like to self-promote. I don't like to put stuff out there. Plus, like Barrett, you kind of mentioned in the 58 page, I'm just waiting for the graybeards to to swoop in and be like, "Well, actually, Operation Prime I'm totally prepared for that, and it hasn't happened at all. Not saying that it won't, but at this point, we're at. All right, no more pictures. It's making noise. wait till it's done. I keep boop boop. But at this point, the video I want to look here is at 1,500 views, which is 1,490 more views than I expected. But there's been a lot of positive from people who just like to know about this type of stuff, and that's kind of where I'm going with it. So I appreciate you guys participating. Well, I hope you enjoyed this rambling trip down memory lane. If there's anything you'd like to know more about, please drop a comment and let us know. And as always, click like and subscribe. Stay healthy out there and fly safe.